amazing talent that comes here. You know, we are blessed. So thank you guys. You are a blessing. So today we continue our talk on our series that we've been doing on Paul Selig's book that is channeled work called The Book of Love and Creation. And today our title is Your Story is Your Creation. Now we know that intellectually here in the New Thought community, we know that thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. We know that. But do we know that? That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to take it down to a deeper level. So where do these stories come from? What are they? How we learn them? Well, it starts pretty early with our parents, right? Our parents give us stories. Stories about what behavior constitutes being a good girl or a good boy. What will we get validation from? They also teach us what behaviors would be a bad girl or a bad boy, right? And that is in our own little family system. Our own family system. So we learn who we are by the stories that we're told. And if we're lucky enough that we have parents that tell us repeatedly, you are good and you are wonderful, then we believe that we are good and we are wonderful. Conversely, if we are told often enough that we are bad, then we internalize that and we believe that we are bad. And that story keeps on creating over and over again in our lives. So that's the first system that we get exposed to. The second system that we graduate to is the school system. And in the school system, we learn what it takes to be a good student. And if that's important to us, we continue those behaviors that will garner us praise and accolades as a good student. Conversely, if we're getting C's and D's, all of a sudden we are not a good student. We are bad or hopeless. Now these systems come into being because the goal of them is to help navigate through the world, to teach us how to navigate through the world. What's interesting is when we move from one system to another system, the rules may not be the same. The how to navigate may look quite differently. When we start working, often the story that we hear about being a great employee is someone that every moment that they are working, they are producing long hours of overtime, is a model employee, to the point where we forget to care for ourselves and our families. That's another system. So all these systems have one thing in common. They perpetuate fear. They perpetuate fear. And that fear comes from wanting to control people, wanting to control others. I can't tell you when I was in school the number of times I had the nightmare of missing the exam, forgetting my notes, like failing on my oral examinations in seminary. I mean, those were like the chronic fears that I would have of not being successful in that seminary system. So it was important for me to jump those hurdles, those hoops, those rules, to be successful in that system. But what happens when we're not successful in the system? Often, we feel like failures. I know I do. I feel like I've completely screwed up. And if I follow that thought long enough, I get to the point where I look at, am I valuable enough? Am I worthy enough? Am I not enough? And we see that today in our society. All these systems that are in place to control others, and when they are not successful in those systems, they either implode, substance abuse, suicide, whatever else, or they explode in mayhem, in creating trouble for other people. So those are the systems that we learn. Those are the stories that are created as we are in part of this culture into defining who we are. So we grow up, and from the systems that I went through, I am an A student, destined to succeed, and an overachiever. You know, that's part of who I am. So imagine when I get to college, and I get my first C, and I get my first D, and I'm on scholarship. Oh my goodness, I didn't know who I was. If I'm not a straight A student, then I'm nothing. So at that point in my life, that was a really big upheaval at looking at who am I? Who am I really? What story am I saying about who I am, and that defines the kind of life that I'm entitled to live? One of the things about the systems is once we're successful in that system, we tend to go to sleep a little bit. We go to sleep because we've bought the Kool-Aid, we've unwrapped the Kool-Aid, we've made the Kool-Aid, and we've drank the Kool-Aid. Right? I'm living a dream. This is the life that I'm entitled to. So I don't really have to worry about those people. I don't have to worry about that environment. I don't have to think about that system. Or, on the other end of the spectrum, if we have failed so miserably in systems, we've checked out. Or we are checked into a facility, and we sleep there. So part of my process with you is about awakening, about looking at our fears. And why are we so afraid? Well, there was this quote that I ran into when I was reading the book, and it just blew me away. The ascended teachers say, you're scared. You're scared of breaking the rules. But more than that, you're frightened that if you become this thing you say you are, you will be frightening to others. You will be frightening to others. They will not understand you. They will blame you. They will think you ridiculous, or they will move away from you because you are now embarking on an experience that they cannot identify with. Wow. I read that and I was just like, whoa, whoa. And you're probably thinking, Sherrie, you got nothing to be afraid of, come on. And I'm going to tell you a story. Will you tell me afterwards? Okay, thank you. And it's right with us. Love that. As some of you may know, I've been really trying to work with Joey's in the house. Hi, honey. I didn't see you, sorry. She's another seminary student from another denomination, so sorry. Where was I? As some of you may know, I've been trying to work with ECM on campus, and that's the Ecumenical Campus Ministries. And it hasn't really been successful. And I've just been like, oh, why is this not successful? So here's the story. You know, they probably don't really want me because of my theology. They're probably terrified of who I am when I get there. They probably think this is a cult, and therefore they don't want me around their students. On and on I go. And what do? I get into my righteous indignation, outrage. Come on, there's 2016. What are we doing? And I read this quote and I'm like, oh, so that's the story. That's the story that I'm telling myself. And my outrage is because I've given up my authority and my power. I've given up my authority and my power to someone who's in authority over there. And I decide I'm taking my power back. If it doesn't work there, then I'll work somewhere else, because this is my calling. No one or no thing can block what is mine. Amen? Amen. So I call up the chair of the board and I say to him, here's my experiences, And here's why I think this is not something that you may want to do or go forward with. It was a wonderful conversation. It was a wonderful conversation. And to realize that ECM is going through their own restructuring, their own figuring it out, their own, well, this hasn't worked, our system went down, we're getting a new email, we're getting a new phone system. All of this is going on with them. Has nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with me. So I'm now plugged in there, but it was good because for me, I got to look at my stuff. I got not to be in this attitude of don't you know how a fierce lady I am when you see her? Come on, right? But now I get to work with them. So I'll be there every Thursday for the month of July, talking to students, doing the veggie lunch and things like that. So I'm really excited about that. I got out of my way and I took my program. So where does all this come from? It comes from us believing that we are separate from each other. There's this sense of separation. And there's this wonderful quote that I found on 111. And it says, that belief that has been created that you are separate from or apart from and have to appease a creator who is enraged by your existence or your behavior or your desiring of your own knowledge. This is born in your collective consciousness. It is a way for you to be controlled. It is a way for you to continue to perpetuate your own sense of loss, of separation, and unlovability. Unlovability. Would you move that forward for me, please? Thank you. And a big system that we don't talk about is the religious system. The religious system is a way that many different faiths, it doesn't matter what faith you choose to practice, but many faiths use to control the masses. They move from that initial spiritual experience of that relationship with God to allness, to the universe, to being in a contract. Now, when you're in a commitment, there's a choice. You're choosing to have that personal relationship with God, with allness. Contractually, it's almost like there are consequences if you don't do X. And you maybe think, I don't get that. Well, we can look at a few of our sacraments. Marriage. Better believe we've got a big old contract for that marriage, don't we? Because if you don't love me the way that I want to be loved and I deserve to be treated, what happens? Divorce, then I'm getting 50% of whatever it is, isn't it? Consequences. Even something simple like a baptism. You know, there's a certificate for that, and the godparents write on there that they are going to be the spiritual leaders for your child's development. Contract. And these contracts are coming from fear, not from choice. When we are in our divine self, we then have the opportunity to know whatever the decision is that we make, it's okay. It's okay, because it is coming from our wise place, from our connectedness to God, to allness. And whatever relationships we are in, whatever situations come to us, guess what? It always starts with us. Click. I guess my clicker's not working today. Thank you. All right. Thank you. Your relationship with you, until you understand that you are the basis for every relationship that you have, you're going to be in trouble. Because you are at the center of all your relationships. I'm going to allow Graham, if you would just forward the slides from now on. Thank you. You, in your relationship with whoever you are, who's always there. You, me, nah, that's who's there. We. That's correct. Thanks, Emmett. So imagine that you're able to change your consciousness. You're able to shift from being in that victim role to being in that power role. You know, so many of us spend our lives blaming our parents. I've got to tell you, I've been there. Sometimes I still dip there, I'll be honest. Right? Really? Sorry, Emma. Down, thumbs down. We blame our parents for the deal that we have in life, for how they treated us. We're 40, 50, 60, 70 years old, and we're still blaming our parents. And when we do that, what we do is we give up our power. We give up our ability to empower ourselves. We create this victimization that we then play out over and over again in all of our relationships. Because we're afraid to take our power, to take responsibility for our lives. To say that I can transform my consciousness, and therefore because I do that, my life changes. My relationship changes. Now, when we have strife in our relationships, it comes up because of our need to control others. If we stop trying to control each other, the world may be a little bit better. If we are able to see that being a divine being here doesn't mean that we abdicate being human beings and then we get to float somewhere in the clouds and play harps maybe and nothing ever bothers us again. That is not about being in our divine nature. Being in our divine nature is about empowerment. It's about being awake. It's about being active. It's about being both the divine and the human. It's about changing our world. And one of the most powerful lessons, if you would go to the next slide, Graham, came up in this quote, and I thought, oh, this explains a lot. The ascended teacher said, you do not change the ignorance of others by combating their ignorance. I'm going to just repeat that again. You do not change the ignorance of others by combating their ignorance. That actually enhances the ignorance because it supports the requirement for protection. When you realign to your knowing and others can come into their knowing through congruence of intention, you can then change the self. And the self will then create others in their landscape who will reflect back the new choice, the new awareness, the new reality. Operating from the divine, my friends. That's what we're talking about. Making a spiritual, emotional shift from believing what fear tells us is truth. That's fear's role. Fear's role is to say, what I'm telling you is true. Therefore, be afraid. Be afraid of those others. Be afraid of those immigrants. Be afraid of those other races. And then let me protect you. That's what fear does. Being a divine being is about empowering ourselves, knowing that we are the constant in all of our relationships. Now, I know that most of you know this intellectually. But there is no formula for this work. The only thing that is necessary is to allow whatever is to be. To allow your feelings to come up and then determine, what was the story that I told about this situation? Do you know how much misinterpretation happens by us making meaning out of something that's not even there? This morning, Graham and I were driving here, and he accidentally hit a bird because it kind of swooped into him, you know, it swooped into the car. And I was like, oh, Graham. And he was like, well, it wasn't my fault. And I was like, I know. I was just like, oh, Graham, I know how painful that must be. Just in that little tiny incident, right? So he could have gone on this, well, she thinks I'm a crappy driver, whatever. And I was just having compassion, you know, for who he is. And Matt, you're dying to say something. What do you got?
Motor of my bike accidentally ran over a snake on a tray, on a mud tray.
Okay, thank you. That was kind of sad, huh?
It was still alive.
Good. Okay. So he was telling us that his bike accidentally ran over a snake, but it was still alive because it's a green one. Okay. So we'll end with our last quote, which is, what is ours to do? As a collective soul and our group consciousness, you have already projected the means of destruction into your environment. And now, have to become responsible for uncreating those same things. And that is done through thought and through conscious awareness. Thought and conscious awareness. Okay, you guys, the priors, I don't know about you two. That's all right. Okay.
We're thinking about all the things we're going to do now.
It's a lot.
Uncreated.
The uncreated. But if we all do it together, if we do it all together and not say it's your job to do, it's their job to do.
It is our job.
It's our job to do.
What's your job, sir?
Okay, well, you know, it's everyone's job. So I'm just going to end with it. This is about lifting the veil, my friends. Looking at the things that are no longer serving you. Looking at the systems that are in place that may have been built from fear, and now we can change that and shift that to systems of love. Because when you change yourself, you're able to change the world. So I'm going to invite Josh and Brooke up to prepare us for meditation. And as they do that, I also want to tell you that we're going to do things a little differently.